Next slide. Perfect. There you'll see there's a QR code available for anyone who hasn't yet downloaded the full report but would like to. So I'll pause for just a second to allow people to do that. Great. Hopefully that's given you enough time, but there is a slide later on at the end of the presentation, should you have missed this opportunity. So moving on to a bit of an introduction to myself and Drew. So my name's Armley Bormer and I'm a principal consultant at Gallagher, and my colleague Drew Munn is a future impact advisor. And we're here today to kind of summarise the main key points and takeaways from the State of the Sector report that we've completed. I'll talk a little bit about Gallagher before I go into the state of the sector. So a little bit of context as to who we are and what we do. So we shape employee experiences. We're a global communication consultancy with over 150 specialists spanning Europe, North America and Australia. And we work with 300 clients globally. We're passionate about changing how people feel about work. And we do this by elevating all aspects of employee experience to transform organisational performance. But we're also part of a much broader entity within Gallagher, who are global leaders in insurance, risk management and consulting services, and have over 30,000 expert advisors that work in collaboration with our clients to deliver results. So moving to the first slide of the State of the Sector report, we wanted to start by giving a bit of a history and background to the report. So we've been running this for about 10 years now, and we've probably seen the most activity across the last 5 years. So it really has been an evolution over time. If we look specifically at 2017 and 18, those were particularly reactive years for communicators. Office 365 seemed to be the hottest trend, but we found it was typically deployed without much consideration for accompanying channels, and there was a real lack of governance around the use of it. And this really seemingly set organisations back. In 2018, we all heard that an app was going to solve our problems, which I think you all may agree. In reality, that was just simply not the case. There seemed to be a real lack of insights as to why that solution was being offered and how that connected to what people really wanted and needed from communications. So that was a particular challenge we saw across that period of time. At the same point, particularly for large complex organisations, we also heard that there was a lot of noise, and divisions and regions were all kind of competing with each other for their employees' attention, which led to a lot of scrabbling around and challenges for communicators specifically. So if we fast forward to our latest findings in 2022, so we're seeing a lack of work-life balance and declining job satisfaction. And these are some of the greatest factors that are contributing to that mass employee departures, or the Great Resignation as everyone's calling it. So our working norms have changed completely, and the pandemic has made people really sit back, pause and reevaluate what's important to them. So what are their values, and does the organisation they work for support those? And what's the purpose behind what they're doing? I think it's important to acknowledge that the pandemic can't be blamed for, all these problems, and that psychological and physical burnout has been around for a number of years, but it's certainly heightened it and brought it to everyone's forefront and attention. So in 2022, right now, we believe that many people will be asking what work looks like for them now, and will the organisation that they work for listen to their wants and their needs, and are they implementing things to support the employee? So whether that's a long-term hybrid working model that I know a lot of communicators are trying to understand and grapple with at the moment, or whether that's prioritising well-being, those are all really important factors. But the key takeaway for us is it's not just about gaining feedback from your employee workforce, it's really about the action that follows that and demonstrating that you're taking action. So all in all, I think we're in a really exciting era for internal communications. But what this really tells us in this kind of journey is that It's so important to keep the employee at the heart of everything we do. Let's try not to get distracted by those shiny new solutions, because quite often the thing that really works and is most effective can actually be really simple. So moving into our respondents this year. So participation was the biggest ever, with over 1,300 respondents from all across the world. It's the first time in the state of sector history that North America has become the most represented territory. We know that internal communications is evolving everywhere, and that it's really seen the greater importance being put on the function. But I would argue that we've seen the most amount of growth in the least amount of time in North America, and that really shows here, where we can see that the US was the largest contributor at 38%. It is important to note that we grew our footprint in many other regions this year as well, including Canada, Latin America, and the APAC regions. So for us, this report really helps us to build a solid picture of what global trends look like. But it's also now allowing us to look a little bit more in more granular detail on a regional level. And we're able to have those conversations with practitioners within specific regions to identify how they compare to others. For all those here today listening into this webinar, we really hope that this report brings you some really insightful data, which you can use to identify the particular challenges or experiences within your own organizations or the clients that you work with. So looking at our top 3 priorities for 2022. So unsurprisingly, our #1 priority this year is to engage teams around purpose, strategy, and values. Yet, as I'll explain on the next slide, our biggest challenge is around disengaged employees. So this indicates that there's a real disconnect that needs to be addressed here. So when we look at attracting and retaining our talent, and this great resignation that seems to be happening at this point in time, I think it's really important for organizations and communicators to remember that people don't necessarily stay in a role or a position or a workforce because they're compensated well. It's so much more than that. It's about that culture, it's about team behaviors, and that is all driven from this purpose, value, and strategies. So it's more important than ever to create a story around this and really focus on the behaviors we want to be driving and re-engaging employees around this area. So the second biggest priority we're seeing is adapting our channel strategy to hybrid working. And this is the first time we've seen this in the State of the Sector report, again, unsurprisingly, due to the pandemic and how that's changed how we work. So we're seeing a shift in personal priorities and lifestyle changes, which has meant that there's a change in expectation around how we work. So the last few years, there has just been such a sheer amount of uncertainty that we're all experiencing. But again, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's resulted in people having the opportunity to really reflect on what's important to them, and this ability to experience working in a different way has started to get people to question how they want to work. So how is their employer supporting them? Does the organization have the same values? And how do they achieve that better work-life balance? And I think it all comes down to how we communicate these messages, how we communicate our new approach to working and the hybrid model. Are these messages being communicated in a meaningful way with your workforce? And if they're not, how as communicators can we do that more effectively? And lastly, it's about enhancing people management communication. As we all know, our managers are often our front line, and they are absolutely critical in cascading and supporting our narrative. So making sure that we support our managers in turn is so important, and we need to equip them with the right information, tools, and resources at the right time. Interestingly, an observation we found this year is that enhancing leadership visibility has dropped out of the top 3 after holding the position for, I think, around the last 3 reports, 3 years running. And I think that's just because the pandemic has given many leaders a greater presence and has opened up those communication opportunities for them. So it's less of a something we need to do, and it's something that most organisations are now doing quite well. So then looking at our 2022 top challenges. So what as communicators are we struggling with at the moment? Loud and clear, our number one challenge is disengaged employees, with 37% of respondents saying that's the top issue. Then the second being a lack of capacity within the team to deliver what's needed at 32%. And the third is a lack of analytics and measurement at 27%. So let's address that first point to start with. So disengaged employees. I think the pandemic has pushed employees to the brink, and it's tore up traditional working practices. And so we're seeing that there's a number of areas we're having to re-engage employees in. So in particular, that desire for a better work-life balance. How can we make the best use of our talent wherever they reside? And whether that being, in the office or outside, location is less of a challenge or an important piece now. Flexibility is also really important. So most employees, research is showing this, that most employees now want to work from home for 2 or 3 days a week. And they don't want to be in the office full time anymore. And this has massively changed how we work and how we approach working. And we're seeing from, this mass exodus and great resignation that employees are willing to jump ship if their needs are not met in this area. The next piece is about re-engaging employees with that clear vision. It's about having a clear line of sight in terms of what the purpose and direction means for employees. And that lack of clarity can really make people feel anxious. And lastly, one of the biggest areas and the most common we're hearing is around employee well-being and making that focus critical. Excellent. So now I would like to address the second challenge of a lack of capacity. So this answer has been prominent for a number of years now, but never have we seen it as the second largest challenge for communicators globally. And I think we've all seen the rise and of importance and recognition placed on the IC function. The pandemic has really shed a light on how important communication is in engaging and supporting the employee workforce. So that's great. It's about time that happened. But I think, alongside that, that's placed significant demands on existing teams and the profession. And the third is a lack of analytics and measurement. So we've been living in a very reactive world. I think now, as we're starting to come out of the pandemic, we need to look at how we can become more proactive. Every communicator knows that measuring their communications is absolutely essential, because without this, how do we know that it's hitting the mark? So bringing back effective measurement is absolutely essential for us as communicators to stay on top of our game. So next, I am going to pass over to Drew, who's going to talk a little bit around these 3 key areas.
Awesome, thanks, Arnie. So as Arnie mentioned, we've got 3 key areas that we want to pull out of the report based on those challenges. The first is purpose and strategy. Then we're going to look a bit at employee experience, and then a bit at hybrid working. And within each of those, we're going to break down how the results of the report that we've run this year really highlight where things have changed, and also where we see common trends that have existed for 3, 4, 5 years, and how we can start to tweak those to hopefully start to address the imbalance that we're seeing across the board. So if we start with purpose and strategy, I think that anybody on this webinar, anybody in internal comms will probably agree that you didn't get into it to just forward emails and add a nice little pretty header, but 80–90% of your time seems to be spent doing that. And what we really have seen, and the way that the shift has happened from in the world of pre-pandemic to now, is suddenly as communicators we've become massively more important to the day-to-day running of the business. And part of that is highlighted where this strategy element is missing, and it's given us all a great opportunity to start sitting in front of the right people to have those conversations. So what we really need to do now is dig down and work out, actually, are we working in the right strategic space, and how can we develop that going forward? So if we look at change has been the biggest part of our world of strategy for the last 3 years, really. And again, in the survey that we've run, we've seen exactly the same outputs as we would expect. Huge numbers of people are expecting to run different change programs. Obviously, ways of working is a huge part of that because we're moving into this hybrid world. But even within there, we're seeing other things that have come to the fore, which things like how we do culture, because now the normal stalwarts of culture of how the office environment is aren't as important anymore. So we really need to reevaluate how we're putting value into an employee's culture when we might never see them face to face. And equally within there, how we're developing the technology that we're using to communicate with our employees. All of these have an impact on internal comms, and all of them, to the greatest extent, we've spent the last couple of years just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what will stick. And so now this is the year where we're starting to see how we can develop a proper strategy to work with each of these and really develop going forward, rather than just carrying on the way we have been, which is effectively reacting to what we need to do. We can start to take a bit of a breath, step back and say, actually, now we've got through the worst of things, we can start to find out what's worked, what hasn't worked, how can we develop this into an ongoing strategy. And within that, what we've also seen for various global reasons is a huge uptick in how we're using those strategies as a way to create a space for the company agenda, both in D&I and ESG. And across the board, the amount of effort that employers have to put in now on these subjects has increased massively. As part of the engagement perspective with employees, it's become so much more important that this isn't just a talk track, that we're actually making real steps forward as companies to prove how impactful we want to be on the world we exist in. And it's just as important to employees that we're doing that as it is that they get paid well. And this shift has really come to the front again. As Anneli said, it's not just about salary anymore, it's about the wider space in which a company works. And there's so much more value being put on that by employees. As internal communicators, it's our job to make sure that that's how we're presenting. But the thing that none of these numbers really show in a huge amount of depth is where the success comes from. The success in all of these doesn't come from tokenism. It doesn't come from just having a communication every now and again where you remind people that actually, yeah, you've got diversity processes in your business, or that, yeah, you really want to help the world survive the climate emergency. It comes from building into everything you do. And again, that's the job of a communicator. It's about us weaving that narrative into the day-to-day experience. You look at the wider world, and it's not just about putting your recycling out anymore. It's about actually the decisions you're making when you're buying in the first place, the decisions that you're making as you go through your whole life. And it's the same touch points within a business. How your company is affecting the world around it needs to be woven into everything. So thinking about when you're sending out print comms, are you making it clear that you're using sustainable resources? When you're sending out email communications, are you using that as an opportunity to flag up other initiatives within the business to make it part of every part of your employee journey? So you're starting to create that space where people expect it from you, and you're developing an ongoing narrative. And within all of that, of course, the biggest part, the biggest question and confusion for us all is what's our job as communicators? Because we've spent 2 years effectively being the only voice an employee hears, because they're not in an office. They're not day to day talking to the right people about the right messages. So we've just effectively become a mouthpiece for everything from crisis comms through to suddenly leaders becoming the most visible people within the business, and dealing with their constant need to appear in Zoom meetings and talk to employees on an individual level, something that they've never done before, but is now just part of their day-to-day life. Where does that leave us? Because, as I said at the beginning, we're not just here for tactics, we're here for strategy and for build. And we've seen that grow massively. And that's a really, really great thing. We've seen that now we've got that foot at that table. We've sat down, we're through that door. People are starting to listen to us, and that's great. The fact that we are faces that the C-suite recognize is the first step towards getting the validation that we need in that space, which is amazing. But you do just have to put a little bit of a cynical view on it for a second and ask, that's great, but how many of you have actually hired more people in your business to do this? Because I guarantee most of you haven't. And that's why when you look at the outputs that we saw on the survey, resourcing has become an even bigger problem than it ever was, because suddenly we've got our seat at that table and we're talking about strategy and we're creating the space that we want to be in the business, but we've still got all of those tactical comms to send down, and we've still got all of that crisis to deal with, and we've still got all of those new technologies to work out how we're going to use, how you're going to talk to your employees over Teams rather than email, what's the difference between all of those channels. And at the moment you're doing double the work. It's great that we've got this strategy, but where's all of this tactical work going as well? And that's really the question that we need to start to address over the next year. But again, positively, we've seen a massive improvement across the board in actually how we think our people are understanding the messages we're giving. And I think this comes probably from two different things. One, we're talking to them so much more often, and that's always going to help reinforce the messages that we're giving. But there's a second thing in there as well, and that comes down to how we're getting that feedback. And I think for the first time, really, beyond just surveys and occasional focus groups, two-way communication has seen an uptick. And we started talking to people in far more just part of our day-to-day lives across the board as communicators, to start to get that feedback and help us tailor those messages and help us build on them. But there's still a load of work that we can do here, because as much as it's great that we think that we're helping people understand the vision of the businesses that we represent, on top of that as well, we do need to get people to feel valued in delivering that. And still less than half of the people we think are understanding what their job has to do with that ultimate vision. And that's not engagement. That's not connecting people with the purpose of them being the business. We need to get those numbers up. We need to help personalize that message to the point where it's less about this is what the company does and more about this is how you help the company do what the company does. And that's recognition beyond anything else. I mentioned a bit about how the way we've done listening changes, and of course surveys are still top of the list, always have been, and no doubt will be for many years to come. But we started to see a swap around in other things. So social channels have taken a big jump up. They're still small, but they've taken a big jump up. Also, the amount of feedback that we're getting from other sources, so feedback from people managers is a great first step. As we talked about, people managers are hugely important to the comms journey. So the more we can get feedback from them, the more we can start to create that loop where we're tailoring content, building it in the right way. And ultimately, hopefully, getting a bit more valuable qualitative data. As communicators, we spent years trying to prove our value. And the only way we've been able to prove our value is with dashboards. And dashboards are just numbers. And realistically, you look at those numbers and you ask what they mean. Yeah, it's great that however many people have opened your email. It's great that people have clicked on your link and read your document about what the business is doing. But does that actually mean they're engaged? Does that mean they're listening and doing what you want them to do? You can't get that from a dashboard. You need qualitative feedback as well as quantitative. And all of these are where we're starting to see growth. So the line manager feedback, the interviewing, social channels as well, hugely important that we can start to get those touch points where people are using them, all to create that world of insight, where we can sit at a table now, and rather than just say, yeah, people opened the email, we can start to say that message didn't land well because, or that message did land well and this is why. And all of that makes you far more valuable as a strategic advisor than just being able to say people open the email because, hey, it's work. Of course they're going to open their email. That's far more preferable than doing whatever they're employed to do. They're going to read your email. They're not necessarily going to engage with it. And I'm going to pass back over to Arnley to pick up a bit on employee experience.
Excellent. So the next section is about employee experience and are you encapsulating everything employees think, feel and see? So I wanted to start with a bit of recap on what we mean when we talk about employee experience. So it's the entire relationship between employee and employer and explores every interaction and every moment that matters across all these 6 key areas. So for me, employee experience is about how you treat your employees, and there's increasing levels of importance that need to be in place on well-being, diversity, and giving your employees a voice. So let's look at the actual report findings and what we're seeing around employee engagement. So elevating the conversation. Here we can see that there is a real say-do gap. So we know that employee experience shouldn't be ignored, and we know that it offers a compelling return on investment, which benefits everyone from customers, employees, and stakeholders. But our evidence is suggesting that leaders recognise that it is important, with 59% saying that they believe employee experience can increase morale and talent retention. And then 82 also said that internal communication is seen as a key driver to achieving that employee experience. But then when you couple this with the fact that respondents in this survey named employee disengagement as our biggest challenge this year, there is a clear disconnect. And it's a disconnect from what we're saying is really important and what we're saying we value and what we want to achieve, but then how we're actually acting and the priorities we're placing on employee experience and the focus we're giving it when in our everyday working practices. So the next slide, the view from the top. So how are we what are we hearing from our C-suite level in your organization? So only 31% of respondents feel that there's a clear mandate from the top that's driving that employee experience. And 42% said that employee experience hasn't been formalized in their organization yet. And for me and Drew, I think we found this stat particularly stunning because it's so clear that most organizations spend time, budget, and resource in improving that customer experience with various things such as customer journeys, customer personas. But our organizations looking inwards and focusing on getting it right internally, perhaps not based on these stats. And so do we do the same for the employee experience? Are we looking at employee journey maps? Are we looking at employee personas? Because how can we get this right externally if we're not getting it right internally with our own staff and our own employees? So research has also shown that 53% of employees either strongly agree or agree that their organisation values customers over their employees. And that's a real problem. So how can we as internal communicators elevate this employee experience conversation? Well, it's with the stats. It's about going about and talking to your CEO. For us, it shouldn't be something that's missed. It should be a top priority for every CEO, and it's time to share that evidence. We're now in the room with the leaders. The pandemic has really helped us to gain a step and a foothold within those key meetings, those conversations. So we really need to push this. We need to influence the conversation and make sure that we're giving as much priority, focus and attention to the employee experience as we are the customer experience within our workplaces. So I'm going to move on to hybrid working and pass back to Drew, who's going to cover this point.
Awesome, thanks, Anneli. So hybrid working, the big meaty elephant in the room. It was something that was always been on the agenda in some form or another. If you work for a company where you've had the absolute joys of years of working up to this, then amazing, please can we all come work for you. But the majority of us work for companies who've said for various reasons, oh yeah, that'll never work. And then all of a sudden, over the course of a month or so, we all made it work. And hey, the world changed forever. So now we're in this situation where we've proved it's worked. We've got over a huge number of technical, legal, compliance issues, but what we've yet to solve is how we keep that company as a company rather than just a group of people who are all working from their offices at home or sat on their sofas or trying to balance childcare on top of their day-to-day jobs. So there's this huge fluffy bit that we need to get right now around hybrid working. Now all of the tactics are in place. Let's deal with making it feel like work and making it feel like the companies that we all want to work for. And we'll start with a particularly strange stat. It's strange for a couple of reasons, which we'll go into in a bit of depth. But this year, 39% of the people that we surveyed globally said that adapting their channel strategy to hybrid working was a priority for them in 2022. We think it's a bit strange for a couple of reasons. Firstly, this is the first year that it's risen as quickly as it's risen. This is not the first year that we've done state of the sector during the pandemic. So what we needed to really understand is why it suddenly jumped to the top. And we think a big part of that is because we've just been reacting for so long. And this is the first time that we've been able to step back and have a bit of that breather and say, okay, great, let's make this work long term, not just solve this crisis. The other reason it's a bit odd is because if you look back through all of the previous problems, it's not something that was ever picked up as one of the major challenges. Major challenges are all the more common things that we'd expect: leadership comms, employee disengagement, that kind of thing. Yet for so many people to be prioritizing building a strategy around hybrid working and that to be more prominent than the solutions to all of those other problems really shows actually how much of an impact that we as communicators think this has on our individual employees' lives, that all of those other things will be better if we can just get our hybrid working right. And while, yeah, there's a lot we can do to fix that, what we do have to remember is it's not going to solve everything. So we can't rely on building this new channel strategy around everybody being in different environments to solve all of those engagement problems. So yeah, hugely important, but let's remember before we go about fixing that, this isn't going to solve everything. We need to keep half an eye on all of the other normal engagement factors, because if we focus all of our attention on this, we're just going to have some amazing channels and still just disengaged employees on the back end. So hybrid engagement can look however you want it to look as a company, really. Some people jumped very quickly into the world of Teams, Zoom, meeting face to face as well as you could in an environment where you couldn't actually see anybody else. And we've really achieved amazing things amazingly quickly. If you just look at some of these stats, in general, all of these are great. They're looking really good. But then you take a step back and ask some questions about why these stats look the way they look. We think, as it stands, as the 1,300 people who responded to this survey, that our channels have a reach of about 80%. Awesome. What about the other 20%? We've built these strategies around having huge numbers of channels now. There's far more than we've ever had in business before, but we're still missing 1 in 5 people. And why are we doing that? Why have we built these solutions that miss out on 1 in 5 people? It's something that we really do need to try and resolve. Yeah, we're never going to get 100%. We do totally understand that, but how can we try and reach that extra 20%? The other number on here that we talked about earlier and continues to be important is that two-way dialogue. We're up over 50%. Great first steps, but let's try and build more on that. We need to make sure that all of our solutions give space for two-way dialogue. If you're trying to sit at a C-suite table and talk about the strategy that you're building as communicators, you need to be able to say that, yes, you have that feedback in place. You need to be able to have that authority to say, I know what our business is thinking and I know what's going to be right for the future. At the moment, 56%, awesome first start, but let's get that number higher so you can have that authority at that table to say, I know this business inside and out, and I know what's going to work and I know what's not going to work because I've got the data to prove it. So remembering that number, 39% of people think that they want to prioritize building a channel strategy. Let's look at actually how we break that down underneath the bonnet as well, because that's really indicative of why we're in the situation we're in as well. So almost 20% of people have already completed a review. It's brilliant. We've had a couple of years to do it. That's a good first step. But are you reviewing that review? How often are you asking, are these channels working? Is this strategy working? Is there a better way of doing this? Because I guarantee you that the landscape has shifted even in the last 3-4 months compared to where we were last year and compared to where we were at the beginning of the pandemic. We've got 34% of people are in the process of reviewing it. Again, great. And 20% people think that their strategies are fit for purpose. I would really urge you to look at trying to consider whether or not that's valuable. And 12% think that they really need to do this, but you just aren't at the moment. And again, we go back to that resourcing point. This isn't a simple task. You do need to put a lot of effort into it, and totally understand that at the moment there's still a load of firefighting going on. So not everybody's going to be able to get to it as soon as really it needs to be done. The 10% who are waiting to see how that situation evolves. So as communicators, I think we need to be a bit faster. I think we need to start looking at actually the situation is going to continue to evolve. There's always going to be new crises, new problems, new challenges, and that's always going to carry on developing. Right now, as a group of people, that within the business, our job is to make sure the business is ready to speak. We need to be better at prioritizing getting that message out. Now isn't the time to be sitting back and waiting. It's the time to be putting in, even if it's stopgaps, putting in your channel reviews, putting in some thoughts about how you're going to start to develop this. Because sitting back and waiting just means you're never going to be on the front foot. You need to be proactive. You need to stop sitting and waiting to see how things are going to play out, because we're always in an end state of something, and that end state is always going to develop more. This leads us on to an interesting point about unachieved potential. So one of the big things that employees have asked for years, if you look at survey results from across the board, they've always asked for choice. And that choice comes in huge numbers of different forms. In the world of benefits, it comes from, I don't want to take all my salary as salary, I want to take some as medical insurance, I want to do this, I want to do that. In the world of communication, predominantly it comes from, I want to choose how I'm communicated with. Yet, if we look at the numbers, they really haven't changed. Consistently, it's not widely available. Consistently, it's something that a few people have played with and it's not really worked. And across the board, it seems to be more common in the larger companies where you have just generally more structure in place. But what we don't see is any value in it. And I think that's why you see these numbers staying so low, because across the board, what are you doing other than saying, I want to receive this as an email versus I want to receive this as a Teams message? And asking that question as to what your choice actually means is really key. I would argue that the majority of companies who have tried it and it didn't work, or aren't willing to try it at the moment because they don't think it will work, is because they're not asking the question of actually, what are we using our channels for? Because once you know what you're using your channels for, then that choice is an informed choice. It's not just the same message in different channels. It's starting to say, I want to prioritize different messages as an employee. And part of that is then understanding the messages that they're going to miss. Because right now, people receiving a message as an email that they're not going to read, if you send that to them in another form, doesn't mean they're going to read it. You need to understand how to adapt that message. And again, that's where your strategic head comes in. As a communicator, we need to decide what messages are actually important for people to read. There are thousands of messages people see in a day, from work, from home, from clients, from colleagues, from parents, from children. What messages are you actually saying that are worth reading? And how can you prioritize them in the channels that people are looking for? Because at the moment, we're not doing a great job of it. And then to come back to the people manager point, because I think that this is a really key one. What we're trying to do as communicators is make sure people understand a message that the business is giving. We've seen earlier how important people managers are to that communication process and how much we rely on people to talk about it. And that's part of the results that we look at every year. Still, huge numbers of people rely on people managers either to give the message in the first place or to reinforce that message once it's been given. And we need to be, as communicators, thinking about how reliable that channel is. Are we giving them the right training? Are we developing the right things to give them the right tool set and create the right journey for them going forward? Because if you're just relying on normal communicators, normal people managers, they're not communicators. They're going to try their hardest, but they're not going to deliver the message in the way necessary that you want to. So engage with them, develop with them. So many times we've talked about this, and so many times we've seen it come up in the past, but this year really started to skew towards the increased expectations. People are expecting more from us as communicators, and that will only increase as there's fewer and fewer natural channels. You can't just talk around a water cooler anymore, so you need to have a channel to replace that. You can't just expect a manager to be able to walk into the office and offhandedly mention something, because there isn't that space to do that for so many people anymore. So we as communicators are so much more important. And if we look at how those expectations have increased, again, it comes back to the question of, are you resourced correctly to deal with this? Are you relied upon but not backed up by the business? And remember, you have more voice now than you've had for years. So now's the time to start pushing the business to give you what you need. So whether that's looking at resourcing and pointing out how successful you've been as communicators to get your business through the pandemic, whether that's extra training, whether that's CPD, whether that's support within the business from other parts of the business to get you involved with the conversations. You have more power now than you've had for years. Let's use that power and try and make our lives a bit easier. Let's not waste it, because if we get through this silently and nobody really notices how much pressure communicators have been under to make the last few years a success, then we've wasted it. So let's use this as a chance now to really jump on it and get what we need out of the business so we can do a better job going forward. And within that, we come back to the question of support. So we're asking for people managers to be a big part of our job, but we're also asking for this bigger loop of feedback. So we have those stats that we can sit down and prove that we're good at what we do. We need to start prioritizing how we're providing support to all of the elements of our chain. And the key one for us within there was people managers. 34% of people managers have access to communication training, yet over 50% of companies rely on your people managers to communicate. This ridiculous weak link in a chain that you can do amazing things around, but you're never going to pick up that link unless you get good communicators as people managers. And one of the best ways you can do that is to train them. And that doesn't necessarily mean huge amounts of effort. I'm not expecting everybody to come away with qualifications, but simple things. So you're involving them in the process and building a structure where you can do that. So are you talking to people managers before you send out a message so they know how to land it with their teams? Are you giving them the answers before the questions come in, or are you just leaving them alone to fend for themselves? All of these little tiny simple things where we can start to get that 34% up higher and higher and higher. So when you're sitting down and talking about communications, the weak link isn't the people managers anymore. And you've dealt with that problem and you started to engage in the right way. And again, built that feedback loop, which is so important to prove your worth as a communicator. So overall, from thousands of results, from hundreds of thousands of individual data points, what are the key learnings that we've taken away from where we are and why we are where we are this year, and how it's been so different to the years that we've run this survey before? I think what we've seen is a far more defined purpose and strategy than we've ever had before. it's been great to see that, because it's been something that we've been struggling with for years. And with that comes the fact that we now have a more clear narrative from the business, because we've been pushed into a corner effectively, and they've had to engage with us as communicators far more than they have in the past. What we need to do now is really empower ourselves off the back of that. So keep that dialogue open, keep the collaboration with the right people ongoing. It will just filter away otherwise, and we'll end up like we were 3 years ago, and wanting more input, wanting more access to the right people. We've got that access now. Let's keep those conversations open. Let's keep it useful to us in the long run. And again, on the insight point, we've started to see how insight's great, but we need to be able to really bring some evaluation to that as well. Let's qualify some of those numbers that we're getting in, and ask the question of why they are the way they are, because low numbers aren't bad, high numbers aren't always great. Let's work out why they are the way they are, and have a bit more of that nuanced discussion. Now we've got the right ears to talk to, and we're not just sending an email saying, hey, we did good this month. Now we can sit down and say, we did well, but we could have done better because of X, Y, and Z. Within all that space, the key point for me, and the space that we've seen the biggest opportunity to grow in, is how you as an advisor to the business can be a support to every part of the transformation of a business. You should be sat at that table when people are asking questions of how are we talking to our employees, but you should equally be sat at the table when they're asking questions like, how should we be rolling out hybrid working? Because beyond communication, you're going to be the one who's telling employees what the future of their business looks like. So you need to have a space to be that voice, to sit there, and when someone in a cushy office in London says this is how we're going to do it, you need to be able to sit there and, as an advisor of the business, say this is how people are going to respond, and this is how you should message it to make it look the way it needs to look, and to make it land the way you want it to land. Because if there's one thing that we've seen from all of this, for the 10 plus years that we've been running State of the Sector, having communications professionals in the business and actually using them in the right way is so important to the health of the business, vital. And all the time you're just sat there nodding along and saying, okay, I'll take that message and I'll send it out. You're not advising, you're not being used in the right way. So let's capitalize on that. Let's build and take all of these positives. And when we come and sit and talk to you next year, what will be great is that we see those high numbers are still high. And the ones where we got all of that promised, but they're still not great, we want to see them grow as well, because we've got the chance now, all of us together, we can change where we are more than we've ever had that opportunity before. So let's do it. Let's challenge ourselves to be in a better place next year than we are this year. And in the meantime, celebrate how well we've come out of the last couple of years, because it's not been easy, but we've made huge headway where we want to be. Awesome. So I think that we've got a couple of questions come in, and it would be great if we could start to run through and answer any of them.
Got a couple of questions. I'm just waiting to see if anybody else would like to ask first before I pose my own question.
I would say go ahead, Binu. I think that you're sneaking in there up front.
I am. So just wanted to ask, with so many things to communicate in so little time, how do we prioritize what is shared and when? And how do we push back when sending announcements, while also, making sure that you keep your, stakeholders satisfied?
Shall I start, Drew? So for me, I think a real pivotal or poignant part of that is to have that clearly defined communication strategy. I think that will help you take control of what you communicate and when, and also sharing that with your leadership team so that they get buy-in and they know the process will allow you to kind of be able to monitor and articulate the purpose of the communications better and why that matters to employees. I think Drew mentioned earlier, we're kind of those gatekeepers to really question why we're communicating and make sure that if it's, question, is it important? Does it matter to the employee? Because chances are if it's not, it shouldn't be communicated as a key thing. It could be put in one of those, more monthly updates or roundups. I also think more than ever, it's so important to have a clear process or strategy around your channels and how you utilize those. So you can better coordinate how messages are cascaded down to employees and when. And then we talked about line managers and the importance of those, of them as a way of cascading those more reactive and urgent messages so that you're doing that in an efficient way. And then you're leaving that, your communications for those really important messages or narrative that you need to communicate with employees on those more formal channels. Anything to add, Drew, in terms of that question and how we get it prioritized and how we manage the noise?
No, I'd say that covers it very effectively. I think the other part in there that I'd capitalise on is that being an advisor back. So it's so easy for us, especially when we're overworked and we've got a pile of things that we need to do and another pile of things in the in train, that the response is just no. And that's not the response a stakeholder really wants. They want yes, but they might settle for no because. And it's being able to say no because effectively and be able to back yourself up that is where that starts to come into being able to deliver that solution. So saying, no, I'm not going to send that message because it won't land well, because I've just sent this and that has more impact, or because if I send this now, people are going to get really annoyed about this other message that's getting sent. So being able to advise on why you're saying no means that people are far more likely to respect you and walk away than they are to just go, well, it needs to get sent, so I'm going to send it myself. And then that just creates a hugely fragmented issue rather than creating this cohesive channel strategy.
Thanks, Drew. I think there's a follow-on question from that. How do you make sure your channel strategy beats the Teams and email fatigue after lockdown, etc.?
So I think this is a really fun one where some super out-of-the-box thinking needs to come into businesses in general. I think as communicators, we're probably better placed to do it than most other people. But the question that I always ask in this kind of situation is, how do we send fewer emails? How do we put less messages out into the marketplace rather than how do I get this message across? And the moment you start asking that question is the moment you start to really analyze what those key stress points are, where you've got that critical path of content going out. And then when you understand that to a certain extent, you can sit down and go, well, why are these messages going out like that? Because the majority of messages that urgently cross a communicator's desk aren't urgent messages. It's just because they haven't been planned properly, or they are trying to react to something and get ahead of a narrative. And with the right structures in place, you can do all of those things in a far less intensive way and with far fewer messages. It just takes a bit more forward planning from the entire business. And the only way you can really get to that point is by, as a communicator, enforcing that across the space. So looking at actually how you do roundup emails, how you prioritize getting content into a form that everyone has a space to join, but has deadlines, or looking at actually reducing the number of people who can send a message to the entire company. So when a message goes out from a communicator that's been thought through, it's not fighting against the fact that Bob from accounts has just sent out a message asking if anyone's got spare headphones. And it's all of those kind of things where you can start to say, you as a communicator exists within this business. There's so much more going on outside that you can try and take control of, that will mean that what you're delivering is suddenly far more impactful because you've cut away a lot of the noise that isn't to do with you, and you've made the noise that is to do with you more structured.
Thank you. Arnelli, would you like to add anything to that, or?
No, I think Drew hit all the points I would have positioned perfectly.
Right, I had just one other question, but it's about measurement, and I dropped in the chat earlier. think we have just 1 more minute then. Do we have the time or?
We are just approaching the hour, and I'm conscious. I know some people will have back-to-back meetings, unfortunately, but if I'm happy to certainly stay on for another 5-10 minutes. But equally, if people do want to depart, don't feel rude. We'll make the recording available through the CPD portal as well for those that need to head off, because conscious we're at that time.
Right, just one last question, then I'll call it a wrap. From an analytics perspective and how we encapsulate everything employees think, feel, and see, is it a lack of measurement or a lack of acting on the areas being measured, which is the real challenge in delivering better employee experiences? And how can we get that right and close the data gap, so to speak?
For me, oh, sorry, Drew.
Yeah, I was just going to say this is a super interesting question. I think that it's a bit of both.
Yeah.
So the question of what are you measuring also then needs to have the follow-up question of why are you measuring that, and what value are you trying to get out of that measurement? Because the joke always with statistics is you get a statistician in and they can make numbers say whatever they want the numbers to say, and that it's entirely true. I could say that your email that gets a super high open rate is really successful, but then I could go out as a communicator into the marketplace and talk to those employees who opened that email and find that actually none of them have read it. They opened it, read the first line, and just stopped. And so that's the space, I think, that asking that why we're measuring things starts to really open up what measurements we're missing. And then the difficult question is, how do you fill those gaps? Because what you're going to be doing is essentially undermining all of your stats. You're going to be asking, actually, are these things valuable? And the answer in quite a lot of cases is going to start to be, well, no, not in that way. And so from the perspective of filling that gap, you need to understand how you can do that. And a lot of that will come back down to not necessarily finding alternate stats, but the way that you present those. So again, use your voice more than just a dashboard. So it stops being a thing where you're presenting back just numbers and starts to be something where those numbers need a lot more narrative around them. And that narrative needs to be impactful and it needs to be expert. And that's what ultimately the value of a communicator is in the business, is to be able to read those numbers and explain what they mean and why they might not be accurate.
And I would just add, yeah, we can't be afraid of being flexible. We need to adapt our communication strategy and see that as an evolving document. So as we gain stats, we need to then revisit that and go, okay, so is our strategy, is our approach correct? And if not, why, and what do we need to change based on those insights we're gaining? And we also need to onboard our C-suite and have them involved in that and gain their buy-in, because quite often they can act as a blocker for those change, and that quick reactive change to go, okay, this is what we're seeing. We need to go in a different direction because what we're doing currently doesn't work. So having that buy-in from the offset will really help you have those and manage those conversations to be able to respond and for it not to be a big long-winded dialogue or discussion.
Thanks, Arnelli. I think we've come up the end of our time for the questions, and I'd like to thank Arnelli and Drew for their time in presenting us the State of the Sector report, and to Gallagher and to Dan as well for organizing and putting everything together, and for all those who participated and who were with us on the call. I wish you all a very good day. Thank you.
Thank you,
everyone.
It's been lovely. It's been great to talk to you all.
And to you. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.